Thacker Burleigh, often referred to as Harry T. Burleigh, played a significant role in the development of American art song, having composed over 200 works in the genre. He was the first African-American composer acclaimed for his concert songs as well as for his adaptation of African-American spirituals. In addition, Burleigh was an accomplished baritone, a meticulous editor, and a charter member of the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, ASCAP. Henry Thacker Burleigh was born in Erie, Pennsylvania on December 2, 1866. Burleigh was surrounded by music from a young age. His mother was his first music teacher, and he learned the African-American spirituals, for which he would later become famous, from her and from his maternal grandfather, who had been enslaved but had successfully purchased his own freedom.
So I came to know H.T. Burleigh as a Negro spiritual arranger. When I discovered his art song, this was during my doctoral program. I included them on a recital I prepared. And, at the African American Art Song Alliance. That's when I first heard one of his art songs. And I gotta say, it baffles me that he's not known for his art songs, because for me, the art songs are more intimate, more lush, more unique, I would say. They give us some colorings that just kind of pull on your heartstrings a little bit. For me, I am an H.T. Burleigh art song fan, for sure.
Well, I think we know him and think about him most because of his arrangements of the spirituals, right? And his art songs have actually been really neglected, I would say, in relation to the spirituals.
I've sung a lot of his spirituals, but I've recently heard so many of his songs that are just stunning. Alicia Fox, who's one of the young artists at LA Opera, programmed his Till I Wake and Among the Fuchsias, and I was just, this is beautiful, So I'm dying. There's so much music I'm dying to sing. So that's on my list. I didn't know his songs before, and now I've been listening, and they're just so many really beautiful ones. We know him so much for his spirituals, and he was so much more than that.
Harry Burleigh was a dedicated church musician throughout his life, beginning as a young man in Erie, where he sang in the choirs of the Cathedral of St. Paul's, the Park Presbyterian Church, and the Reformed Jewish Temple. However, Burleigh's passion for music extended beyond the sacred. In his late teens, he was so determined to hear a salon recital by Hungarian pianist Raphael Josephy at the home of local music lover and his mother's sometimes employer, Elizabeth Russell. He stood outside in the snow to listen and became ill. After revealing the cause of his illness to his mother, she asked Russell to hire Burleigh as a doorman, since he would not have been welcomed as a guest at Russell's racially segregated events, so he could attend the performances without fear for his health. This afforded Burleigh the opportunity to hear many well-known classical performers such as Venezuelan pianist Teresa Carreño and Italian tenor Italo Campanini. In 1892, at the age of 26, Burleigh received a scholarship to the National Conservatory of Music in New York. The years Burleigh spent at the conservatory greatly influenced his career, mostly due to his association and friendship with Antonin Dvorak, the conservatory's director. After spending countless hours recalling and performing the African American spirituals and plantation songs he had learned from his maternal grandfather for Dvorak, Burleigh was encouraged to preserve these melodies in his own compositions. In turn, Dvorak wrote themes inspired by the songs introduced to him by Burleigh in his Symphony No. 9 in E minor, also known as From the New World. In addition, Burleigh served as copyist for Dvorak, a task that prepared him for his future responsibilities as a music editor.
A unique thing about Mr. Burleigh is that he also worked for the Ricordi Publishing Company. They had an office here in New York, and he worked for them. And so a lot of his stuff was published by Mr. Ricordi, I believe, and I think a lot of his stuff is in the Ricordi archives in Milan now. You know, he's very generous with his time and his advocacy. He was very much known as being very supportive, in particular of women composers. I got my hands on a letter that he wrote Florence Price, encouraging her, and she wanted some songs, see if some songs could be published, but at that time, it wasn't a good time because of the economy, et cetera, you know, and so he was very supportive of women composers like Florence Price, Undine Smith-Moore, you know. Part of his career, major part of his career was mentoring young musicians, especially singers and composers.
He wrote almost 150 art songs. So that's the first piece, is that he's not an insignificant composer in terms of his art song writing. And he actually, throughout his career, his career is sort of broken into two parts. And the first part is when he was writing art song, and it overlaps in the middle somewhere, and then he does the spiritual arrangement. So what we know is more of the end of his career, although there are art songs throughout. And the very last song he wrote was in 1935 to a poem of Langston Hughes, Lonely, Dark, and Lovely, Dark, and Lonely One. It's the only poem he wrote to Hughes. Most of Burleigh's songs are not African American, so except for that poet, he wrote a set for tenor called Passional, which was to the words of James Weldon Johnson. It's a beautiful romantic love song setting for tenor. He is trying, and his generation is trying to assimilate and not stand out as African Americans. He works for Ricordi Publishing, so he has access to publishing and very much wants people to buy his songs. But his songs are on themes of love, relationships, nature. I mean, they sort of are what you find in parlor songs at the turn of the 20th century. The language is very much that, although he will put in some chromaticism that, again, surprises you, it comes out of nowhere in his art songs. He was an operatic baritone or concert baritone and sang professionally his whole life. So you also have what look like miniature opera arias. In Passional, for instance, there's a couple moments he goes up to high B flat in the middle of the art song, or at the climactic part of the art song. And that was quite rather unusual, that all of a sudden it's a range of C3 to B flat 4. That's a pretty expansive range for a song.
They're very different than spirituals, which is nice. I would say my art song is different than my spirituals too. His Ethiopia Saluting the Colors is a great one, and what I particularly like about that, it's a clear narrative, but also his musical quotation. It's Ivesian in a way, and if you listen to a lot of my music, art song, I quote all the time other pieces as part of getting the message out. And so I would like to think I'm innovative in that regard, but I'm not. Burleigh did that. Charles Ives did that, right? And so I really appreciate his art song.
He has one called Ethiopia Saluting the Colors, which is an epic narrative about a soldier coming upon an African-American woman. And so it tells the story of that encounter. And that is one of those three pieces that has, well, it's the only one that really has a racial tinge by using the word Ethiopia in the title. The rest of them were intentionally not racial.
I would have to say that I really, really, ever since I heard them, Warren played them for me, the 5 songs of Laurence Hope were some of my favorite pieces that he did. when I sang Among the Fuchsias, it sounded tonality wise like the color fuchsia. It sounds like the color fuchsia. And so I would have to say that those were some of my favorite pieces. And also the idea that Laurence Hope wasn't really a man, it was a woman who used the pseudonym of a man to have her poetry published. And the idea that Burleigh had to work with people from Europe to have his music published. You know, he had to go across the pond in order to do that. Luckily he had that connection, that exposure. And so the irony there, I always think about that.
He has the Songs of Laurence Hope, which is a set of 5 songs by, it's one of the darkest sets that he has. The poet, was a woman, and she went by the pseudonym Laurence Hope. And she was, her husband was an Indian officer. And so again, the music has a little bit of the flavor of India because she's writing from the perspective of an Indian officer's wife. But it's a sad love story, and but it's also autobiographical because her husband dies, and at the age of 39, she commits suicide because her husband is dead. And so you get that same drama and melodrama in his songs.
So I wake when I wake. So I make when I awake.
They're lovely. So you can get them from Classical Vocal Reprints. Glendower Jones has published all of the Burleigh songs that he has at this moment, but the Saracen songs, the Passionale, are the song cycles that are song cycles and wonderful to explore. Among my favorite songs is one called He Met Her in the Meadow. And I like it because it's so uncharacteristic of Burleigh. It's funny. And it has an actual punchline and is funny. Whereas most of his songs, because of, again, he's trying to be taken seriously as a composer. So he's writing on serious subjects and wants the poetry to be serious. But I had to point that one funny one is there. All his songs are in multiple keys, so it leaves lots of room for every voice type to explore, because some composers do lean more toward a specific voice, but you will find some wonderful songs for every voice type in his output.
Be afraid of life.
I think Burleigh really seemed to respect the spiritual. He was born just a year after the end of the Civil War. So he knew the people who were the former slaves who had created the spiritual. His grandfather sang them to Harry as a child. He knew that music, and he was also quite aware of the negative side of the minstrelsy, songs that were meant to denigrate African Americans. And so to him, being able to take those spirituals that he had loved as a child and to be able to present them first as choral music, because most people who have studied his music are familiar with his Deep River, but he actually composed for chorus spirituals years before that. He also had composed a series of songs that were called plantation songs, plantation melodies, old and new, that were actually settings of poets of that era that were a step towards the concert spirituals that he would later compose.
What made H.T. Burleigh to me just so great and important is that he it's just what he did with the spirituals. He made it mainstream. There are other composers that did that too. Okay, I'm not saying it's just him, but he said, these are art songs. These are American songs, right? In fact, if you think about it, there's only two types of music that's really like just straight American, right? Native American and Negro spirituals, right? And so he was so influential in saying, these songs are relevant. Okay, these are art songs. These are our art songs.
The way that his settings of spirituals has been so prominent canonized particular versions of those spirituals, right? Not just in terms of certain harmonic settings, but it fixed the lyrics. In the 19th century, there were some collectors of spirituals, people like Lucy Kim, for example, who were largely white, would-be ethnographers, or really kind of more philanthropists, right? And to think about his settings of those as a poetry collection that elevated these lyrics that were understood as folk and naive into a textual repertoire as well as a musical repertoire, I think is important.
In 1898, he married poet Louise Alston. The following year, his son, Alston Burleigh, was born. In that same year, G. Schirmer published his first 3 songs, and by 1911, he was working as an editor for music publisher G. Ricordi. His success was enhanced through the publication of several of his compositions, including Ethiopia Saluting the Colors in 1915, a collection entitled Jubilee Songs of the USA in 1916, and his arrangement of Deep River in 1917.
I know with Deep River, I think that the simplicity of the song itself requires one to really be clean in your attack of the song.
His Deep River is A+. Talk about simple, but it just grabs you. It's deep. It's A+. I love it. I love all of the spirituals, but Deep River, that's one on repeat.
It's foundational. He is the foundation of, along with the Jubilee Singers, along with all of that. He is the foundation. That is the first thing. The early master of sort of setting of the most human way to set a song and to also give you a visual. So when you hear Deep River, there's the waves.
So his arrangement of Deep River which was the first published spiritual for voice and piano has those rolled chords. That's a programmatic effect for the piano. That was not. No one would expect anyone to have that as a chorus of singers. But the imitation is of the waves of water. So there's the idea of coming to the edge of a stream and seeing beyond it.
The widespread success of his setting of Deep River inspired the publication of nearly a dozen more spirituals the same year. The settings appeared in multiple versions upon publication, including vocal solos in a variety of keys and choral arrangements prepared by Burleigh and others for mixed chorus, men's chorus, and women's chorus.
I think Burleigh is the pioneer of the concert spiritual for solo voice. Composers, performers, from the very beginning, his very first song, saw that music as an opportunity to be able to connect with the folk music of the African American experience.
He's the first person to try to set spirituals in an art song format. And he has that distinction. And he had heard spirituals from his grandfather. So he knows what hearing them without an accompaniment feels and looks like. And so he doesn't want to destroy that. And I think that that's why, to us now, as we listen to it, they sound a little dated and they're a little bit more simplistic.
You take Burleigh's arrangement, it is steadfast, it is direct, it is emotionally sharp.
The spirituals, yes, have a simpler kind of setting overall. They ride a wave, because he wants you to make that story very clear. And part of the reason why they are going to be such that kind of constant wave and not too all over the place is because you got to get the humanity of these people.
There's a beautiful simplicity in Burleigh's writing, which makes you have to be that much more honest in your singing. You don't have the fun ornaments of Hall Johnson in there. Burleigh gives you the simple truth, and you have to deliver that simple truth in a poignant and beautiful way. And when you hear so many of the older singers singing these pieces, there weren't necessarily all of these flowery embellishments, they just gave you tone and truth and dignity, and Burleigh gave you opportunity to really let the songs speak, let the spirituals speak, and I have a lot of respect for that.
I think the point of writing these spirituals in that style was so that people could hear the root and the bones and the structure around what his other music was created from, and be able to take these pieces and have the simple melody, right? Because the spirituals book is filled with many different spirituals. However, they all have a simplistic nature to them, especially compared to other composers who have taken, liberties with composing spiritual pieces. So I think that this was done intentionally so that we get the foundation of the home with a clarity that allows you to be able to even repeat the melody often after the first time you hear it. Where if maybe it were written with, you know, a lot of ornamentation and all of these other things, it would be a little bit harder to really get to the root of what the melody is.
In its in its birth, in its organic form, its original form, it was a communal activity. Spirituals are sung by a group of people, and if a solo person were singing them, you know, if you knew it, you were expected to sing along. If you have any voice at all, it's a communal activity, and that with the rise of Black concert artists, there was a desire. Well, once they recognized that the spirituals was not only vestiges of chattel slavery or of oppression, but that it was a unique art form and it was something precious, and that people really liked it, and it made you a unique artist. Many Black artists then started to present spirituals. The very first concert of all spirituals was done by Paul Robeson in 1925. Prior to that, I mean, there have been Roland Hayes did spirituals, and lots of groups did spirituals. The Fifth Jubilee Singers and other groups did spirituals, and there was soloists that were part of that. But Burleigh allowed, by making arrangements for piano and for voice, allowed you to be able to do this in a concert version, and in a concert atmosphere, and the piano is the community, so to speak. It's interesting though when you compare Burleigh's arrangements and Hall Johnson's arrangements. With Hall Johnson's arrangements, you hear the choir. That is the choir. It's most definitely, you hear the voices. And Burleigh's arrangements, you hear the piano. You can hear voices as part of the piano, but really it is the piano underneath it. Very interesting approach. Very different.
Musically, there's an honesty, a sincerity, a genuineness to his settings. They're not necessarily flashy, and which is nice in many ways. And he's like, here they are in its most beautiful form in my interpretation, and I really love that. Burleigh's influence on my spirituals were the same as someone like Bach's influence on my music, where I don't necessarily sound like Burleigh, but I definitely have learned from Burleigh or Bach. For example, counterpoint. I don't sound like Bach, but I definitely use a lot of his counterpoint techniques in a more modern way. Same for Burleigh. It's the same approach. How does he set the text? Because he sets text very, very well, right? How does he choose harmonies? Do my harmonies sound like Burleigh? No, but my approach to figuring out harmony is probably similar.
In a way, I made the claim that he stabilizes a body of poetry, but in another way, he actually unsettles it, right? In that other composers who often want to set the spirituals, right? William Grant Still, that's one of the places he goes to. These are composers who set the spirituals. It's almost like a rite of passage. And so what he also did was give people a place to be having a particular kind of conversation around a repertoire that's so central to making Black classical music Black, and Black American classical music Black American,
Again, I don't want to say other people didn't do this, but for me, he was the one that said, you know what? Here are the spirituals. I'm gonna set them. I'm going to make them mainstream, you know, in a way, in terms of art song, in terms of classical music, and make I'm going to make them relevant. This is our music, and I think that's his legacy because there are many of us that are arranging or reimagining spirituals, and many of us are doing this, and I don't care what you say, we couldn't have done it without Burleigh. We just could not have done it. You know, we couldn't. I don't know how. You know, like he made our job one easier, but also relevant.
I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long, children. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. Oh, let me tell my mother I've come along. Oh, give me little time to pray. With a undone head and an aching heart. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long, children. I've been